When did Vulkan join together the two halves of his legion? How did he deal with the Ork Attack moon that was in his way? How did the two halves of the salamanders react to being united? Friends, let's find out, and welcome to another 40k video. When Vulkan came to his legion, it was in the hour of their need. The salamanders, led by their Lord Commander Cassian Vaughn, had become embroiled in the rearguard defence of a cluster of colony worlds near the Terran division, against a wave of Ork marauders, with the bulk of the Legiones Astartes either engaged with the expedition fleets breaching space towards the eastern fringe, or committed as reserves against the horrors of the Rangda incursion from the Halo stars to the galactic north. The salamanders were the only Space Marine Legion able to respond to the crisis. Fighting against vast and overwhelming odds, the Legion's primary force numbered some 19,000 Space Marines, had marshalled the local defenders, and held out for nearly a standard year in a series of running battles against well over 1 million Ork raiders scattered across hundreds of ramshackle ships, rock asteroid vessels, and dozens of hulks. The actions of the Legion had allowed the evacuation of 3 entire planetary populations to the nominal safety of the Terra system, but at a terrible cost. As the conflict progressed, they suffered the grieving moment of losing their commander, whilst the remainder of the salamanders became all but trapped on the dead world of Antaeum, a lightning rod drawing the Orks to them for battle. The Primarch learned of their plight and refused to stand by, and came to rescue his sons, though the ones on the planet had not yet met him. And in this next section, guys, we draw on Vulkan's Primarch novel to cover this event in some juicy details. Vulkan and his sons enter one of the Ork Attack moons in his way, and they go deep. They want to blow the core to destroy it, and they burrow deeper in a device called the Termite. It makes sludge of the green flesh in front of it, but it hits a wall dense with explosives, which force it to take another route. Vulkan sees the Orks have been smart, they are herding him, and they face an army of hundreds of thousands, and as their progress is slowed, metal jaws from above fell down and snapped onto the Termite, lifting it so that the drills that were letting them get further in could not cut a path forward. Its tread found only the air. Vulkan vaulted onto the claw and climbed towards the girders that held the claw, and an Ork chieftain was stupid enough to get in his way. Vulkan reached and cut the greenskin's shotgun in half and sank his weapon deep into its guts. Then the Ork artillery fills up the cavern, aiming at the Termite. Vulkan could see how close they were to the core of this Ork moon, and he realises this is as far as they can get. So he comes up with a new plan. He divided his men, splitting his forces up to reach the targets his Termite could now not. Some, however, stayed with it and began to take out the guns that were attacking it. At this point, a gargantuan Ork warlord came through the wall breach to face Vulkan. With armour so thick it looked like it was wearing tank hulls. Amongst the cannon shots, the claws and the Termite are shot to the ground. A mag-locked Vulkan rode at the fall and was ready when the giant Ork struck. Anvil's light fired from Vulkan's hand and through a foot of the Ork's armour, but the creature was not slowed. As Vulkan dodged a strike made with the Ork's hammer, he acknowledged something about the character of this warlord, the pride of the beast in using that weapon. Meanwhile, the 6 companies under Shomar pushed further into the attack moon, whilst the Orks pressed them at every intersection. The Orks, distracted by the challenge of Vulkan, ran to the call of their warlord, whilst the forces under Shomar saw their target, but then the Orks began to pin them down, keeping them under constant fire. Behind them, the Termite exploded. A salamander called Raitem was knocked down. Vulkan was within that fireball, and as it cleared and the Primarch of the salamanders looked around, the shelling continued, and in fact Vulkan was still fighting the Ork chieftain. Then Vulkan came out of the wreckage. His arm was cracked with explosions and the hammer of the Ork Lord, but it wasn't finished. Vulkan dodged its hammer blows and caused damage in return, some mechanism on the Ork's armour, and then a blow went into its flesh and Vulkan could smell fungus. The Ork turned faster. ignoring the gaping wound and using the momentum to swing the hammer around in a lightning strike. Vulkan saw it coming, but this time the attack was too fast. He pulled Night Forged, but a mesh of collapsing gears held it fast for a moment. He jerked it free as the hammer smashed into his side and shattered his ribs. In the follow-up, he lost Anvil's light. Vulkan stopped a killing blow by grabbing the shaft of the hammer with one hand. It was hot and burned through the tears in his armour. Suddenly the Ork brought the hammer up. Vulkan let go. The Ork hauled the immense weapon back over its shoulder and brought it back down that same arc with the force of the strike. Vulkan roared and leapt, pushing against the compacted wreckage and out of the furnace. He shot up inside the reach of the monstrous arms and drove Nightforged up through the slag of the Ork's helm, into its throat and up into its skull, and then Vulkan removed its head and called his salamanders across the base. "With me!" Shomar heard his Primarch's words, and his company placed the charges and concealed them. On the way out, they collapsed archers to stop further Orks swamping them. Meanwhile, Vulkan continued to smite the lesser Orks. The behaviour of the Orks at this point changed. Vulkan leapt from the top of the wreckage and came down amid the Orks with the force of thunder, and the greenskins fell back before him. They quailed before the being who had slain their unstoppable leader, and the ripples of panic spread out around the Primarch as Orks scrambled away from the dark colossus. Then he cut two down with a stroke of Nightforged and burned a furrow through their ranks with Anvil's light. Burned corpses toppled, their heads and upper torsos vaporized. The Orks screamed at Vulkan and charged back. He met their attack with one whose ferocity dwarfed theirs, and Raiten, one of Vulkan's sons, almost laughed with exhilaration to see the Orks outnumbered by a single warrior. The greenskins surrounded Vulkan, stabbing and shooting wildly. Vulkan marched into the tide and slew Orks as if he were reaping grain. The horde could not slow him. The faster they attacked, the more quickly they gave themselves up to death. "To the Primarch," Raiten shouted, "into the fires of battle, unto the anvil of war," his brothers answered, and they charged out of their shelter. Then it's reported all the charges are set, and Vulkan asked them to fight just a little longer. The numbers are against them, though Vulkan's been doing pretty damn well so far, I think. But now the odds are even higher. There were 6 against thousands. The Primarch had already done the impossible. It would be a small matter to force the thousands to turn from the goal the subordinates of the great warlord demanded they perform, to turn their savage instincts his way and slaughter them. His sons followed in the footsteps of his Primarch, and no enemy was too powerful, no odds were too great. Outside, some of the Legion's ships moved inside the attack moon to find those who lived there, still giving opposition. And as his forces are slowly managing to escape, Vulkan says, "We kill the beast now." He blinked through the auto-sensors of his helm and sent the detonation command. The signal travelled from his armour to the seismic charges, which had been planted, as I mentioned earlier, by his dispersed forces. Then agony racked the attack moon's form. The crust vibrated as the remaining salamanders and Vulkan were taken away to safety. Fire erupted from the fissures in the attack moon, and then the Leviathan exploded. The planetoid became a meteor swarm. Huge chunks of debris smashed through the Ork fleet, turning ships into gas. So he's essentially turned the Orks' own attack moon into like a shrapnel to destroy some of the others. Pretty cool. The book notes that the Ork fleet had come together around a monster and now they died with it. And below, on the planet, the atmosphere of Antium burned with the fires of the rain of stones from above. The salamanders still fought there, and where the meteors from the attack moon fell, Orks died. As the attack moon's remains struck the ground, the mountains to the south had vanished in the dust, the clouds burned and the rocks fell yet, but the sky was beginning to blacken once more. Another kind of night was gathering over all of Antium, a night that would not pass for centuries. The volcanoes roared, shocked to life again by the hammer blows from the sky. Those on the ground rejoice and plan once more that if this is their last night, it will be one of glory. Only 3 still now stand, out of those that Vulkan was trying to reach. And against these 3, the Orks and their chieftain charged. Vulkan spies his remaining sons, and the Orks attacking them, seeing this from the air. And one of the salamanders with Vulkan comments that the Terran salamanders who were the ones that had been fighting on the ground below, had fought with such greatness that it had improved this salamander's opinion of those born on Terra. The salamander and those with Vulkan were not born on Terra, they were born on Vulkan's surrogate planet after the scattering. And below, a cluster of orcs surrounded Erasus, forcing him to fight them, blocking him from reaching his fallen brother. Numion charged at the chieftain, firing continuously, but the beast ignored him. Then a demigod dropped from the sky, and the force of his being made him seem larger than the orc chieftain, though he was smaller to the eye. Numion, who always remembered this moment, then other salamanders from the gunship joined Vulkan, and Numion saw them, but could not understand how they were his brothers. As he thought this, Vulkan staggered the chieftain, then shot the orc's gun so it lost its hand. Then their gene father removed the orc's other arm with his blade entirely. The orc screamed in impotent rage. Then Vulkan removed the power claw of the orc from its severed arm, and plunged its open jaws into the greenskin's chest. With the beast impaled, he fired the plasma pistol into its face. There was a solemn anger to his actions. He was not killing with contempt. This was judgment, a sentence carried out for the crimes that had been committed. Numion's instinct was to bend the knee to his Primarch. He did not even have to think, for that was surely who Vulkan was. Numion knew this rationality instinctively with every cell of his being. He knew this was his father, and the father of every battle brother of the Salamander's Legion. But there was a war to finish, so the Primarch turned from the body of his falling enemy and fell upon the Orks. Numion did too, fighting with the ferocity of resurrected hope, and there the sons of Vulkan came together and fought together alongside their gene father. The chieftain was dead, the skies raged on, and the Orks knew great despair at this hour. The greenskins fell back before Vulkan, faster and faster, and then they fled. They retreated in disarray, racing north towards the cauldron. Perhaps in the depths of their brutish instincts a glimmer of pride pushed them to try to destroy the salamanders in a final act of defiance. If this was the impulse that drove them, it was an illusion, and it did not last long. Vulkan pursued the greenskins. Raitin, Tekel, and the rest of his escort charged in his wake, with Numion and Erasus, both halves of his legion now united with their gene father. Behind them the heavy armour roared in, speeding across the plain, flattening the remains of a routed army. In the middle distance to the north the flights of gunships laid waste to the horde. Vulkan had commanded them to assist the advance of the Terran 18th, but as he raced north, closing in on the glow of the eruption, he saw that the besieged warriors had already received what they needed. The cauldron itself was destroyed, a flaming glow on the mountainside, exploding ammunition silhouetting the lava-swept ruins. The legionaries had stormed out with such force that they had done more than punch through the orcs at the base of the volcano. They had set them to flight. The Legion of Terror and the Legion of Nocturne converged, crushing the orcs between them. As he drew closer to the suns he had nearly lost, Vulkan saw the fury with which they were attacking. After more than a year of being eroded to the marrow by the orcs, the return of hope had filled them with justified fury, and the demoralised greenskins could not withstand the hurricane of rage that descended upon them from the erupting volcano. The end came quickly, abandoning themselves to panic and flight, their army already reduced to a vestige of the swarm it had once been. The orcs turned west. Beyond the lava fields, the land descended to the bed of a long-vanished ocean, on an endless plain of petrified coral, with no shelter for thousands of kilometres. Shell and flame pursued the orcs to their final end. When the last of the greenskins was a smouldering corpse, the warriors of Terra and Nocturne regarded each other, and Vulkan saw the alloy he needed had been forged on the fields of Antium. Brother had encountered brother, and known that they were no longer lost to each other. Vulkan says, "Your sacrifice to save the people of Taurus Division will be remembered forever," and bowed his head. Vulkan pointed back to the east, where the eruptions and lava flows turned the horizon red. "Behold the furnace, behold the anvil of war, behold the flames of rebirth. Hear me, my sons, hear your name. You are the fire born, you are the salamanders." And on that glorious note of both halves of Vulkan's Legion uniting, we wrap up today's video. It's been a pleasure.